The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Fiona Foster scrubbed the last kennel of the morning, her knees aching against the cold concrete floor, and she wondered for the 100th time why she kept coming back to this place that broke her heart every single weekend. But then a scruffy terrier mix named Buttons pressed his wet nose through the chain-link gate, and she remembered exactly why. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered, reaching through to scratch behind his ears. His tail wagged so hard his entire back end wiggled with the effort. She had been volunteering at Riverside Animal Shelter for nearly 8 months now, every Saturday and Sunday without fail. Her weekdays were spent as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm downtown, but her weekends belonged to the animals that nobody else seemed to want. The shelter was understaffed and underfunded, struggling to keep its doors open despite the tireless efforts of its director, Margaret Chen, and the handful of dedicated volunteers who showed up week after week. The building itself was aging, with leaky pipes and temperamental heating that made winters brutal and summers sweltering. But Fiona loved it anyway, loved the animals who waited hopefully behind bars for someone to choose them, to see their worth. She finished cleaning Buttons's kennel and moved on to the next, losing herself in the rhythm of the work. Scrub, rinse, dry, replace bedding. Check water bowls, refill food dishes, make notes about any behavioral changes. It was meditative in its own way, even if her back protested by the end of each shift. "Fiona, can you come up front when you get a chance?" Margaret's voice echoed down the hallway, pulling her from her thoughts. "Be right there." She gave Buttons one last pat and headed toward the front office, peeling off her rubber gloves as she walked. The shelter's lobby was small and cramped, with faded posters about spaying and neutering covering every available wall space. Margaret stood behind the reception desk, her graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "What's up?" Fiona asked, tossing her gloves in the trash. Margaret looked up, her expression unreadable. "We got a call this morning. Someone wants to tour the facility, talk about making a donation, a significant donation." Fiona's eyebrows shot up. The shelter desperately needed money. They had been operating on fumes for months, and everyone knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to start making impossible decisions about which animals to keep and which to send away. "That's amazing. When are they coming?" "In about 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Fiona looked down at herself. Her jeans were splattered with dirty water, her faded t-shirt stuck to her back with sweat, and she was pretty sure she had dog hair in places dog hair had no business being. "Should I try to clean up?" Margaret shook her head. "I want him to see the shelter as it really is. That includes the volunteers who keep this place running. Just be yourself." The next 20 minutes crawled by as Fiona tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to this mysterious donor. She imagined some elderly philanthropist, maybe someone who had recently lost a beloved pet and wanted to honor their memory. Or perhaps a local business owner looking for a tax write-off. Either way, if they had money to spare, Fiona didn't care about their motivation. She was in the cat room, cuddling a one-eyed tabby named Princess, when she heard voices in the hallway. Margaret's familiar tone mixed with a deeper, masculine voice she didn't recognize. Fiona gently placed Princess back in her kennel and turned just as the door opened. The man who walked in behind Margaret was not what she had been expecting. He was young, probably early 30s, with dark hair that fell just slightly over his forehead and sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than Fiona's entire wardrobe, and he moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to question his place in the world. "This is our cat room," Margaret was saying. We currently have 18 cats in residence, ranging from kittens to seniors. This is Fiona, one of our regular volunteers. Fiona, this is Owen Ingram. Owen extended his hand and Fiona shook it, acutely aware of how rough her palm must feel against his. Nice to meet you, she said, trying to sound professional despite her disheveled appearance. Likewise. His voice was warm, and when he smiled, something flickered in his eyes that she couldn't quite identify. How long have you been volunteering here? About 8 months, Fiona replied. Every weekend. That's quite a commitment, she shrugged. These guys are worth it. She gestured to the rows of kennels where curious feline faces peered out at their visitor. Want to meet some of them? For the next hour, Fiona found herself giving Owen an impromptu tour of the cat room while Margaret handled a phone call. She introduced him to each resident, telling him their stories and quirks. There was Princess, who had lost her eye in a fight before being rescued. There was Mittens, a massive orange tabby who acted tough, but was secretly a marshmallow. There was Shadow, a sleek black cat who had been at the shelter for nearly a year because people thought black cats were unlucky. Owen listened intently to every word, asking questions and even reaching into kennels to pet the friendlier cats. Fiona found herself relaxing around him, forgetting about his expensive clothes and the reason for his visit. He seemed genuinely interested, not just going through the motions for appearances. Shadow's beautiful, Owen said, watching the black cat prowl around his kennel. Why do people still believe those superstitions? Fear of the unknown, I guess, Fiona said. It's easier to reject something than to give it a chance and risk getting hurt. She realized how personal that sounded and quickly added, with cats, I mean. People are weird about black cats. Owen glanced at her, something thoughtful in his expression. I don't think it's just cats. People do that with everything. Put up walls to protect themselves. Before Fiona could respond, Margaret returned. Sorry about that. Should we continue the tour? I'd love to show you the dog kennels and our medical facility. As they moved through the shelter, Fiona tagged along, ostensibly to help answer questions, but really because she was curious about this man who seemed so interested in their struggling little sanctuary. The dog kennels were louder and more chaotic, with barking echoing off the concrete walls. Owen didn't flinch at the noise. Instead, he stopped at each kennel, reading the information cards and watching the dogs with careful attention. When they reached Buttons's kennel, the terrier mix went absolutely crazy with excitement, jumping and spinning and making sounds that were half bark, half whine. Owen crouched down to the dog's level, and Fiona felt something warm unfold in her chest at the gesture. This is Buttons, she said, kneeling beside Owen. He's been here for 5 months. He's energetic and goofy and loves everyone he meets, but people keep passing him by for younger dogs. Can I meet him properly? Owen asked. Margaret nodded. Let me grab a leash. We can take him to the yard. The small outdoor area behind the shelter was hardly impressive, just a patch of worn grass surrounded by a chain-link fence, but Buttons acted like it was paradise. The moment Fiona released him from his leash, he took off running, circling the yard at top speed before returning to shower Owen with affection. He's something else, Owen said, laughing as Buttons tried to climb into his lap. The sound of his laughter was rich and genuine, and Fiona found herself smiling without meaning to. They spent 30 minutes in the yard with Buttons before Margaret suggested they finish the tour. By the time they returned to the office, Fiona's curiosity about Owen had grown into something more complicated. He wasn't just some rich guy looking to throw money at a good cause. He seemed to actually care, to see the animals as individuals rather than just a charitable tax deduction. In the office, Margaret pulled out folders full of financial statements and facility reports. Fiona excused herself, figuring the business talk was none of her concern, and returned to the kennels. But her mind kept drifting back to Owen, to the way he had looked at the animals, to the warmth in his voice when he spoke to them. She was refilling water bowls when Margaret found her an hour later, her face flushed with excitement. "Fiona, you are not going to believe this. What happened?" Owen Ingram just committed to donating $100,000 to the shelter. Fiona nearly dropped the water bowl. $100,000? Are you serious? Completely serious. And that's not all. He wants to set up a recurring monthly donation to help with operational costs. He said seeing the shelter in action, seeing volunteers like you who care so much, convinced him this was exactly the kind of place he wanted to support. The words hit Fiona like a physical force. $100,000 would change everything. They could repair the building, upgrade equipment, hire additional staff, maybe even expand their capacity. It was more than she had dared to hope for. "That's incredible," she breathed. "Did he say why? Why us? Why now?" Margaret shook her head. "Not really. He was pretty private about his motivations, but he did ask about you." "About me?" He wanted to know more about our volunteer program, how many people we have, how often they come in. I got the sense he was particularly impressed by your dedication. Margaret gave her a knowing look. "He's single, you know." "Margaret," Fiona groaned, feeling her cheeks heat up. "He's a donor, a very generous donor, that's all." "If you say so," Margaret said, but her smile suggested she didn't believe it for a second. Fiona tried to put Owen out of her mind as the weeks passed, but it was harder than she expected. The shelter immediately put his donation to work, starting with the most urgent repairs. A plumber fixed the leaky pipes, an electrician replaced the faulty wiring in the cat room, and they hired 2 part-time staff members to help with the overwhelming daily workload. But beyond the practical changes, Owen's generosity had given everyone at the shelter something they had been missing for a long time: hope. The volunteers had more spring in their step, and even the animals seemed to sense the shift in energy. Fiona threw herself into her work at the shelter with renewed vigor, spending even more time there than before. She started a social media campaign to promote adoptions, taking photos of the animals and writing compelling descriptions of their personalities. Within the first week, 3 dogs and 5 cats found homes, including Shadow, the black cat who had been waiting for almost a year. She was uploading photos to the shelter's Instagram account one Sunday afternoon when Margaret poked her head into the office. "Fiona, Owen Ingram is here. He wants to check on how his donation is being used." Fiona's heart did a little flip that she firmly told herself was just surprise. "Okay, should I keep doing this, or?" "Actually, he specifically asked if you were here today. I think he'd like you to show him around." This time, Fiona couldn't ignore the flutter in her chest. She saved her work and headed to the lobby, where Owen stood examining the new notice board that displayed photos of recently adopted animals. He wore jeans and a navy blue Henley, somehow managing to look both casual and impossibly put together. "Hi," Fiona said, and immediately cringed at how breathless she sounded. Owen turned, and his face broke into a smile that made her stomach do strange things. "Hi, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. Margaret said you wanted to see how things are going." "I'd love to if you have time." She did have time. She would have made time even if she didn't. They started in the cat room, where the new LED lighting made everything brighter and more cheerful. The cats seemed more relaxed too, lounging in their beds instead of pacing anxiously. "This is amazing," Owen said, looking around. "It feels like a completely different place." "Your donation made all of this possible," Fiona said. "We replaced the lighting," fixed the ventilation system, and got new bedding for all the cats. We even had enough left over to stock up on quality food and medical supplies. They moved through the shelter, and Fiona pointed out every improvement, from the repaired kennels to the upgraded medical room. Owen listened attentively, asking questions and genuinely seeming pleased with how his money was being used. When they reached the dog kennels, Buttons went predictably wild with excitement. "I think he remembers you," Fiona said, laughing at the terrier's antics. "Can we take him out again?" They spent an hour in the yard with Buttons, throwing tennis balls and watching the dog zoom around with boundless energy. At some point, they ended up sitting on the ground, their backs against the fence, while Buttons sprawled across both their laps in a shameless bid for maximum attention. "I have to admit something," Owen said, scratching Buttons behind the ears. "I didn't come here just to check on the donation." Fiona's breath caught. "No, I wanted to see you again." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Fiona's mind raced. This man, this generous, kind, ridiculously attractive man, wanted to see her. "Why?" she asked, then immediately felt stupid. "Sorry, that sounded rude. I just mean, I know what you mean," Owen said, his voice gentle. "The truth is, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I was here last month. The way you talked about the animals, the passion in your voice, the way you clearly care so much about making a difference, it struck me. You struck me." Fiona felt like her heart might beat right out of her chest. "I've been thinking about you too," she admitted. "I told myself it was just because of the donation, because you saved this place. But that's not entirely true." Owen shifted slightly so he could look at her properly, and Buttons grumbled at being disturbed. "Would you want to get dinner sometime? Somewhere that doesn't smell like wet dog, though I'm actually getting used to that smell." Fiona laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. "I'd like that. I'd like that a lot." They exchanged phone numbers before Owen left, and Fiona floated through the rest of her shift in a daze. Margaret noticed immediately, giving her a triumphant grin that said, "I told you so," without words. Fiona didn't even care. She felt like a teenager with her first crush, checking her phone every 5 minutes to see if Owen had texted. He did text, that very evening, asking if she was free Friday night. She said yes before she even thought about it, then spent the next 5 days in a state of nervous anticipation. She told her best friend, Rachel, who worked in the cubicle next to hers at the marketing firm, and Rachel immediately dragged her out shopping for a new outfit. "This is like a fairy tale," Rachel said, holding up a blue dress for Fiona's inspection. "Rich, handsome guy sweeps in to save the animal shelter and falls for the kind-hearted volunteer. That's romance novel material." "It's just dinner," Fiona protested, but she was grinning. "We barely know each other." "Yet," Rachel said. "You barely know each other yet. Now try on this dress." Friday arrived with excruciating slowness. Fiona left work early, went home to shower and change, and spent far too long fussing with her hair and makeup. The dress Rachel had helped her pick out was a deep emerald green that brought out the color of her eyes, fitted but not too tight, elegant but not overly formal. She paired it with simple black heels and delicate gold jewelry. When Owen picked her up at 7, the look on his face made all the fussing worthwhile. "You look beautiful," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, taking in his dark slacks and crisp white button-down. He had left the top button undone, and she tried not to think about how that small detail made him even more attractive. He took her to a small Italian restaurant in the historic district, the kind of place with soft lighting and intimate tables tucked into corners. It was fancy but not ostentatious, and Fiona felt herself relaxing as they settled into their seats. "I have to confess something," Owen said once they had ordered. I'm not usually very good at this. At what? Dating? At opening up to people. I tend to keep things pretty close to the vest. Fiona took a sip of her wine. So why am I different? I'm not entirely sure, Owen said thoughtfully. Maybe because you're so genuine. When I visited the shelter, you weren't trying to impress me or get something from me. You just cared about the animals, about doing good work. It was refreshing. For what it's worth, I'm not usually good at this either, Fiona admitted. My last relationship ended 2 years ago, and I haven't really dated since. I throw myself into work and volunteering, and I tell myself that's enough. Is it enough, I mean? She considered the question. Most of the time, but sometimes I feel like I'm watching life happen around me instead of actually living it. Does that make sense? Complete sense, Owen said. I do the same thing in my own way. What do you do? Fiona asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about him beyond his generosity. For work, I mean. Margaret mentioned you had your own business, but she didn't elaborate. Owen smiled, something self-deprecating in the expression. I own a chain of sporting goods stores, Ingram Athletics. We have locations across the Northeast. Fiona blinked. Ingram Athletics was huge, a regional powerhouse that had been expanding rapidly over the past few years. She had passed their stores dozens of times without ever connecting them to the man sitting across from her. That's impressive, she managed. It's demanding, Owen corrected. My father started the company, built it from a single shop into something substantial. When he retired 5 years ago, he handed it over to me, and I've been trying to grow it ever since. Some days, I'm not sure if I'm doing it because I love it or because I'm trying to prove something to him. The honesty in his voice touched something in Fiona. I think it's okay to have complicated motivations, she said. Nothing is ever completely pure or simple. They talked through dinner and dessert, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Owen told her about growing up with intense pressure to succeed, about losing his mother when he was in college, about the loneliness that sometimes came with running a company. Fiona shared her own stories about her chaotic family, her 3 younger brothers who drove her crazy but whom she loved fiercely, her decision to pursue art and design despite her parents' concerns about financial stability. You ever regret it? Owen asked. Choosing passion over practicality. Sometimes, Fiona admitted. When I'm eating ramen for the 3rd night in a row because my paycheck is stretched too thin, or when my parents make pointed comments about my cousin who's a lawyer. But then I create something I'm proud of, or I see one of the shelter animals get adopted into a loving home, and I remember why I made the choices I did. Owen reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture sending warmth racing up her arm. I think that's brave. Choosing what matters to you even when it's hard. They lingered over coffee until the restaurant staff started giving them gentle hints that they wanted to close. Owen walked Fiona to her door, and they stood on her apartment building's front steps, neither quite ready to say goodnight. I had a really great time, Fiona said, and it felt inadequate to describe the evening they had just shared. So did I. Owen hesitated, then said, I know this is fast and we just met, but I'd really like to see you again, soon. I'm at the shelter tomorrow, Fiona said. If you want to stop by, the smile that lit up his face was all the answer she needed. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she didn't want to. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. When they broke apart, Fiona felt dizzy in the best possible way. Owen did stop by the shelter the next day and the day after that. It became a pattern over the following weeks. He would come by on weekends, ostensibly to check on buttons or see how the shelter was doing, but really to spend time with Fiona. They would take dogs for walks, play with cats, clean kennels side by side while talking about everything and nothing. Margaret watched their growing connection with barely concealed delight, and the other volunteers started teasing Fiona good-naturedly about her donor boyfriend. Fiona protested the label, but privately, she was starting to think of Owen as exactly that. They texted constantly during the week, good morning messages that turned into all-day conversations. They went on more dates, to museums and parks, and once to a terrible comedy show that had them laughing more at how bad it was than at the actual jokes. A month into whatever they were building together, Owen invited Fiona to dinner at his house. She accepted nervously, understanding that this was a new level of intimacy, him letting her into his private space. His house turned out to be a modern minimalist mansion in an exclusive suburb, all clean lines and expensive furniture. Fiona felt out of place pulling up in her beat-up Honda Civic, but Owen greeted her at the door with a kiss that made her forget her insecurities. "I'm making pasta," he announced. "Fair warning, I'm a decent cook but not a great one." "I'm sure it will be fine," Fiona said, following him into a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was stainless steel and granite, spotlessly clean in a way that suggested Owen didn't use it much. They cooked together, or rather, Owen cooked while Fiona helped and provided commentary. He had music playing softly in the background, and they sipped wine while the pasta boiled. It felt domestic and comfortable, and Fiona let herself imagine doing this regularly, being part of Owen's everyday life. Over dinner, Owen grew more serious. "I want to talk to you about something," he said, Fiona's stomach clenched with sudden worry. "That sounds ominous." "It's not bad, I promise. I've just been thinking about how much my life has changed since I met you, how much happier I've been." "Owen, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not good at this, at letting people in, but with you it feels easy, natural. And I wanted you to know that it matters to me. You matter to me." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "You matter to me too, so much." They cleaned up dinner together, and then Owen gave her a proper tour of his house. Most of the rooms had that same minimalist aesthetic, beautiful but impersonal, like a showroom rather than a home, but his bedroom was different. Books were stacked on the nightstand and photographs lined the dresser. Fiona studied them while Owen watched from the doorway. "Is this your mom?" she asked, pointing to a picture of a woman with Owen's same blue eyes and warm smile. "Yeah, that was taken about a year before she died." Fiona turned to face him. "Tell me about her." They ended up sitting on his bed, shoulders touching, while Owen talked about his mother. How she had been the heart of their family, the one who balanced his father's intensity with warmth and laughter. How losing her had created a hole that never quite healed. Fiona listened, occasionally squeezing his hand, understanding that he was sharing something precious and painful. "She would have liked you," Owen said finally. "She always said I needed someone who would challenge me, who wouldn't just go along with whatever I wanted." "Do I challenge you?" Fiona asked, constantly, in the best way. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. "You make me want to be better, to do more with what I have. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions. Work, gym, sleep, repeat. Now I actually look forward to things." Fiona kissed him then, pouring everything she felt into it. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, and they fell back onto the bed together. Owen's hands tangled in her hair, and Fiona felt like she might catch fire from the heat building between them. "Stay," Owen murmured against her lips. "Stay tonight." She did stay, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They made love slowly, learning each other's bodies with patient attention. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking quietly until they drifted off to sleep. Fiona woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and Owen's arm draped across her waist. She felt content in a way she hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. This was what she had been missing, what all her work and volunteering couldn't provide: connection, intimacy, love. The thought startled her. Love. Was she in love with Owen? They had only known each other for 2 months, but it felt longer, felt deeper. She studied his sleeping face, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the line of his jaw, the rise and fall of his chest, and knew the answer was yes. Owen stirred, his eyes blinking open. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning. Any regrets?" "Not a single one." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "Good, because I was thinking we could make this a regular thing. You, me, weekends together." "What about the shelter?" Fiona asked. "I can't just stop volunteering." "I wouldn't want you to. I'll come with you. We can volunteer together and then spend the rest of the weekend like this. That is, if you want to." Fiona kissed him, and that was answer enough. They fell into a new rhythm over the following months. Weekends at the shelter became a joint activity, with Owen proving himself to be a dedicated and hard-working volunteer. He was good with the animals, patient and gentle, and he wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty with the less glamorous aspects of the work. The other volunteers quickly accepted him as one of their own, and even Buttons seemed to have adopted him as a second favorite person after Fiona. During the week, they alternated between her small apartment and his large house, learning to navigate each other's spaces and routines. Owen's demanding work schedule sometimes interfered, late nights at the office or early morning conference calls, but he always made time for Fiona. He would show up at her apartment at midnight with takeout, or video call her from business trips just to say good night. Fiona introduced him to her family on Thanksgiving, a chaotic affair at her parents' house with her 3 brothers, their partners, and a collection of cousins and extended relatives. She had been nervous about how Owen would fit into her loud, messy family, so different from his own reserved upbringing. But he charmed her mother by complimenting her cooking, bonded with her father over football, and won over her brothers by volunteering to help with the dishes. "I like him," her mother said, cornering Fiona in the kitchen. "He's good for you. I can see how happy you are." "I am happy," Fiona admitted. "Happier than I've been in a long time." "Then hold on to him. Good men are hard to find." Christmas brought Owen's turn to introduce Fiona to his father. Malcolm Ingram was a tall, imposing man with steel-gray hair and a handshake that could crush bones. He invited them to his estate for Christmas dinner, a formal affair that made Fiona grateful for Owen's steadying presence beside her. Malcolm was polite but distant during the meal, asking Fiona perfunctory questions about her work and family while evaluating her with sharp eyes. She felt like she was being judged and found wanting, and her anxiety grew as the evening progressed. But something shifted during dessert when Malcolm mentioned the company's quarterly earnings, and Owen casually brought up the animal shelter. "Fiona's volunteer work, there is actually what gave me the idea for the new community outreach program," he said. "The one that's been generating such positive press." Malcolm's eyebrows rose. "You're involved with that shelter Owen's been supporting." "I volunteer there every weekend," Fiona said. "It's how we met." For the first time that evening, Malcolm's stern expression softened slightly. Owen's mother was passionate about animal welfare. "She volunteered at a rescue when we were first married. It's good to see him honoring that, even if it's taken him this long to do it." The comment was as close to approval as Fiona suspected Malcolm ever gave, and she saw Owen relax beside her. The rest of the evening went more smoothly, and when they left, Malcolm actually shook Fiona's hand with something approaching warmth. "That wasn't so bad," Owen said as they drove back to his house. "Your father is terrifying," Fiona replied, but I think he might have liked me by the end. He definitely did. Trust me, if he didn't approve, he would have made it much more obvious. As winter turned to spring, Fiona and Owen's relationship deepened and solidified. They were undeniably a couple now, integrated into each other's lives in ways that felt permanent. Owen had a drawer at Fiona's apartment, and she had half a closet at his house. They knew each other's coffee orders and Netflix passwords and friends' names. The shelter continued to thrive with Owen's ongoing support. His monthly donations allowed them to hire more staff, expand their foster program, and even start planning for a new wing that would increase their capacity. Adoption rates were up, and the improvements to the facility had attracted attention from local media, bringing in more volunteers and potential adopters. It was during one of their Saturday shifts that Buttons finally got his big break. A family with 2 young children came to look at dogs, and the kids immediately gravitated toward the energetic terrier. Fiona held her breath as they took him to the yard for a meet and greet, not daring to hope after so many months of watching people pass him by. 30 minutes later, the family was in the office filling out adoption papers. Fiona watched through the window, tears streaming down her face, as Buttons climbed into the children's laps and covered them with kisses. Owen wrapped his arms around her from behind, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "He's going home," Fiona whispered. "After all this time, he's finally going home." "You did that," Owen said. "Your photos, your social media posts, your refusal to give up on him, you made this happen." They said goodbye to Buttons together, watching the family drive away with the happy dog's face pressed against the back window. It was bittersweet, as all shelter goodbyes were, but mostly it was joyful. This was why they did the work, for moments like this. That evening, Owen took Fiona to dinner at the same Italian restaurant where they had their first date. She was still emotional about Buttons, talking rapidly about how perfect the family had seemed, how the kids had promised to send update photos, how maybe she would finally stop worrying about him now. "Fiona," Owen said, interrupting her mid-sentence, "there's something I want to ask you." She paused, catching something in his tone that made her pulse quicken. "Okay." Owen reached across the table and took both her hands in his. "These past 6 months with you have been the best of my life. You've made me laugh and challenged me and shown me what it means to really care about something beyond profit margins and business strategies. You've changed me, made me better, and I don't want to go back to who I was before I met you." Fiona's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. "Owen, I love you," he said simply. "I'm in love with you and I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep with you every night. I want to volunteer at the shelter with you and meet your crazy family for holidays and support your dreams the way you've supported mine." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, and Fiona's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. "I know 6 months isn't that long, and if you want to wait, we can wait, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Fiona Foster, will you marry me?" He opened the box, revealing a stunning ring with a single diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows across the table. It was elegant and simple, exactly what Fiona would have chosen for herself if she had ever let herself imagine this moment. "Yes," she said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, absolutely yes." Owen's face split into the biggest smile she had ever seen. He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was out of his chair and pulling her up into his arms, kissing her while the other diners applauded and the staff cheered. "I love you," Fiona said when they finally broke apart. "I love you so much." "Say it again," Owen murmured against her lips. "I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you." They barely touched their food, too caught up in each other and the magnitude of what had just happened. Fiona kept staring at her ring, watching it sparkle in the candlelight, unable to quite believe this was real. She had gone to the shelter 6 months ago looking for nothing more than a way to help animals, and somehow she had found everything she didn't know she needed. The next morning at the shelter, Margaret took one look at Fiona's left hand and started crying. "I knew it," she exclaimed, pulling Fiona into a fierce hug. "From the moment he walked in here, I knew you two were meant for each other." The other volunteers crowded around to see the ring and congratulate them, and even the animals seemed to sense the celebratory mood. It felt right, sharing this joy with the people and place that had brought them together. Planning the wedding became Fiona's new project outside of work and volunteering. She and Owen both wanted something relatively small and intimate, focused on the people who mattered most rather than a showy display. They set a date for late September, giving them 6 months to prepare, but not so long that the waiting would drive them crazy. Fiona's mother immediately took charge of coordinating with the venue and caterer, while Rachel appointed herself the unofficial maid of honor and threw herself into dress shopping and bachelorette party planning. Owen's father surprised everyone by being genuinely pleased about the engagement, even offering to cover the cost of the wedding, though Owen gently declined, wanting to pay for it himself. The months flew by in a blur of cake tastings and invitation designs and seating chart debates. Through it all, Fiona and Owen maintained their weekend routine at the shelter, finding it grounding to focus on something beyond wedding planning. The new wing was under construction, and they loved watching it take shape, knowing it would allow the shelter to help even more animals. One Sunday in July, a scrawny black puppy was brought in as a stray. She was all ears and paws, clearly going to grow into a large dog, with soulful brown eyes that reminded Fiona of buttons. The puppy was terrified at first, cowering in the back of her kennel and refusing to make eye contact. "Poor baby," Fiona murmured, sitting cross-legged in front of the kennel. "It's okay, sweetie. Nobody here is going to hurt you." Owen sat down beside her and they stayed there for over an hour, just being present until the puppy's curiosity overcame her fear. Eventually, she crept forward to sniff Fiona's outstretched hand, her tail giving a tentative wag. "She's special," Owen said softly. "I can tell." Over the next few weeks, they spent extra time with the puppy, whom they named Luna. She was smart and eager to please once she felt safe, and she attached herself to Fiona and Owen with unwavering devotion. It was Margaret who finally said what they had all been thinking. "You two should adopt her." Fiona looked at Owen, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his face. They had talked abstractly about getting a dog together eventually, but this felt right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Luna was theirs in every way that mattered except the paperwork. "What do you think?" Owen asked. "I think we just became dog parents," Fiona replied, grinning. The adoption process was surreally easy after all the months they had spent helping other people adopt. They filled out the forms and paid the fee, and suddenly, Luna was officially theirs. They brought her home to Owen's house, which would soon be Fiona's house too, and watched her explore her new kingdom with growing confidence. "She's going to be huge," Owen observed as Luna bounded around the yard, her puppy awkwardness already giving way to grace. "She's going to be perfect," Fiona corrected. Their wedding day arrived with crisp autumn weather and brilliant blue skies. They had chosen a small historic inn outside the city, with a garden ceremony and reception in an elegant ballroom. Fiona wore a simple ivory dress that flowed when she moved, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Owen had specifically requested because they reminded him of her. Walking down the aisle on her father's arm, Fiona had eyes only for Owen. He stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his expression a mix of love and awe that made her heart squeeze. When her father placed her hand in Owen's, it felt like coming home. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt, their vows a public declaration of what they had been showing each other for months. Owen's voice cracked slightly when he promised to love and support her dreams, and Fiona cried happy tears when she vowed to stand beside him through whatever challenges life brought. When the officiant pronounced them married, Owen kissed her with such tenderness that several people in the audience sobbed audibly. The reception was a joyful celebration, full of laughter and dancing and toasts that ranged from touching to hilarious. Rachel's maid of honor speech had everyone in stitches with stories of Fiona's disastrous dating history before Owen, while Owen's best man, his college roommate James, shared tales of Owen's workaholic bachelor days that seemed impossible to reconcile with the man who now couldn't stop smiling at his new wife. Malcolm Ingram surprised everyone by requesting a dance with Fiona. As they moved around the floor, he said, "I misjudged you at first. I thought you might be interested in Owen for his money." "I understand why you would think that," Fiona said carefully, "but you're not. I can see how much you love him, how happy you make him. Owen is a different person now, better, and that's because of you. So thank you for giving me my son back." It was the most personal thing Malcolm had ever said to her, and Fiona felt tears threaten again. "He saved me too in his own way." "We saved each other." Malcolm nodded, something like approval in his stern face, and then the dance was over. Fiona returned to Owen, who immediately wrapped her in his arms. "What did my father say?" he asked. "He gave me his blessing. For real this time." They danced together as the evening deepened into night, surrounded by everyone they loved. Later, they would leave for a honeymoon in Italy. 2 weeks of wine and art and leisurely mornings in bed. But for now, this was perfect. This moment suspended in time where everything was exactly as it should be. The months after the wedding settled into a beautiful new normal. Fiona moved fully into Owen's house, which slowly transformed from a minimalist showroom into a real home. She added color and warmth, her artwork on the walls and her books on the shelves, and her laughter echoing through rooms that had been too quiet for too long. Luna grew into a magnificent black dog with a gentle soul, their constant companion and beloved family member. At work, Fiona's social media campaign for the shelter had caught the attention of her bosses at the marketing firm. They promoted her to senior designer and gave her more autonomy on projects, recognizing her talent and dedication. The extra money was nice, but more importantly, she felt fulfilled creatively in a way she hadn't before. Owen continued running Ingram Athletics with his characteristic intensity, but he was better about work-life balance now. He left the office at reasonable hours most days and rarely worked on weekends. The company was doing better than ever, expanding into new markets while maintaining the community focus that had become Owen's priority since meeting Fiona. Each new store location included a community outreach program that supported local charities, and Owen made sure a portion of profits went to causes that mattered. The shelter's new wing opened in the spring, a bright modern space that doubled their capacity. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Margaret gave a speech crediting Owen's generosity and vision, but Owen deflected the praise, insisting that Fiona and the volunteers were the real heroes. Afterward, they walked through the new kennels hand in hand, Luna trotting at their heels, and Fiona felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Remember when you first came here," she said to Owen. "When I was covered in dirty water and dog hair and you were this mysterious donor." "Best day of my life," Owen replied. Well, second best. The wedding was the best. Smooth, Fiona teased, but she was smiling. That summer, Fiona started feeling persistently tired and vaguely nauseated. She dismissed it as stress from a big project at work, but Rachel took one look at her and dragged her to a drugstore to buy a pregnancy test. Fiona took it mostly to prove Rachel wrong, so the two pink lines were a complete shock. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the test. "Oh my God." "You're pregnant," Rachel shrieked, pulling her into a hug. "Fiona, you're going to be a mom." Telling Owen was both exciting and terrifying. They had talked about kids in abstract terms, agreeing they wanted them eventually, but eventually had suddenly become now. She bought a tiny dog collar and attached a note that said "Big Sister," then gave it to Owen when he got home from work. He stared at it for a long moment, clearly confused. "Is this for Luna? It's way too small." "It's not for Luna," Fiona said, watching his face. "It's for Luna's future little brother or sister. The humankind." Owen's eyes went wide. "Are you saying—" "I'm pregnant. About 6 weeks, I think." Owen's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing and crying at the same time, before gently setting her down and dropping to his knees to press a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hi, baby," he said softly. "I'm your dad and I already love you so much." Fiona ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had changed her entire life. "We're going to be parents," she said, and it felt real for the first time. The pregnancy was relatively smooth, though Fiona's fatigue persisted through the first trimester, and she developed an intense aversion to coffee that broke her heart. Owen was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she needed anything or felt okay. She loved him for it even when she wanted to throttle him. They told their families at a joint dinner, presenting both sets of parents with grandparent mugs and enjoying the resulting chaos of excitement. Fiona's mother cried happy tears and immediately started planning a baby shower, while Owen Ingram looked genuinely moved, his usual stoicism cracking to reveal the warm grandfather lurking beneath. At the shelter, the volunteers threw an impromptu celebration when Fiona shared her news. Margaret was particularly delighted, having watched Fiona's entire journey from lonely volunteer to married mother-to-be. "You've come so far," she said, hugging Fiona carefully. "I'm so proud of you." Fiona continued volunteering through her second trimester, though she had to modify her activities as her belly grew. Owen became even more of a fixture at the shelter, taking over the heavy lifting and more strenuous tasks. They fell into a new rhythm, one that accommodated the coming changes to their life while maintaining the work they both found meaningful. The baby shower was a lavish affair that Rachel organized with Fiona's mother's help. Friends and family filled Owen's house, which Fiona had decorated with colorful touches that made it feel warm and lived in. They played ridiculous games and ate too much cake, and Fiona opened present after present of tiny clothes and baby gear that made the reality of impending parenthood feel both exciting and terrifying. Owen's gift to her was presented privately, after all the guests had left. He led her upstairs to the room they had been slowly converting into a nursery, and she gasped when she saw the completed space. The walls were painted a soft sage green, with hand-painted woodland creatures dancing across one wall. A beautiful crib sat in the corner, and shelves held books and toys and all the things a baby might need. "When did you do this?" Fiona asked, touching the painted trees with wonder. "I've been sneaking up here while you were at work," Owen admitted. "I wanted to surprise you. Do you like it?" "I love it," she said, and she meant it. The room was perfect, warm and welcoming, a space where their child would be safe and loved. Their daughter was born on a snowy evening in late February, arriving 3 days before her due date after a labor that was both shorter and more intense than Fiona had expected. Owen held Fiona's hand through every contraction, steady and supportive, and cried when the doctor finally placed their tiny, squalling baby in Fiona's arms. "She's perfect," Fiona breathed, staring down at the red-faced infant. "Owen, she's perfect." "Just like her mother," Owen said, kissing Fiona's sweaty forehead. "You were amazing." They named her Emma Rose, and she was indeed perfect despite being a terrible sleeper. Those first weeks were a blur of diaper changes and midnight feedings and running on almost no sleep, but Fiona had never been happier. Owen was a natural father, patient and gentle with Emma, willing to walk her around the house at 3 in the morning while singing off-key lullabies. Luna took to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, lying protectively beside Emma's bassinet and alerting them immediately if the baby made any sound. It was ridiculously cute, and Fiona took approximately 1,000 photos of the dog and baby together. They brought Emma to the shelter when she was 6 weeks old, introducing her to the place that had brought her parents together. Margaret held the baby with the practiced ease of someone who had raised 3 children of her own, and the volunteers cooed over her with appropriate enthusiasm. Fiona felt a sense of coming full circle, standing in the shelter with Owen and their daughter, part of an extended family built on love and shared purpose. As Emma grew from infant to chubby baby to curious toddler, Fiona and Owen's life evolved to accommodate her. They reduced their shelter hours slightly to focus on parenting, though they remained deeply involved in the shelter's operations and fundraising. Owen established a foundation to support animal welfare organizations across the region, with Fiona serving as a board member and helping to identify worthy causes. Fiona's career continued to flourish, and she eventually left the marketing firm to start her own freelance graphic design business. It allowed her more flexibility to be present for Emma while still doing work she loved. Many of her clients were nonprofits and animal rescues, letting her combine her professional skills with her passion for helping animals. Emma's second birthday party was held at the shelter, because of course it was. The toddler tottered around the yard, giggling with delight as she helped the volunteers play with the dogs. She was gentle with the animals, having been taught from birth to be kind and careful. Watching her daughter interact with the shelter dogs, Fiona felt a deep satisfaction, knowing they were raising Emma with the values that mattered most to them. "She's going to be a volunteer here someday," Owen said, sliding an arm around Fiona's waist as they watched Emma try to throw a tennis ball for an enthusiastic Labrador mix. "Probably," Fiona agreed. "We've definitely passed on our animal-obsessed genes. No regrets." She turned to face him, this man who had walked into her life on an ordinary Saturday and changed everything. He had a few more lines around his eyes now, and his hair was starting to gray slightly at the temples, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. More than that, he was her partner, her best friend, the love of her life. "Not a single one," she said, and kissed him while their daughter squealed with laughter in the background. Years passed in the beautiful, chaotic way that years do when life is full. Emma grew into a bright, compassionate child who did indeed become a junior volunteer at the shelter as soon as she was old enough. She inherited her mother's artistic talent and her father's business sense, a combination that promised great things for her future. Luna aged gracefully, her black muzzle turning gray, still devoted to her family until the end. When they finally had to say goodbye to her, they buried her in the backyard under a flowering cherry tree, and the whole family cried together. A month later, they adopted 2 new dogs from the shelter, a bonded pair of senior mutts that nobody else wanted, giving them a comfortable retirement home. Fiona's volunteer work evolved into a leadership role on the shelter's board of directors, helping to guide its continued growth and success. The shelter was now a model for the region, frequently featured in news stories and animal welfare publications. It had saved thousands of animals over the years, and much of that success could be traced back to Owen's initial donation and the ongoing support he and Fiona provided. Owen eventually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Ingram Athletics, turning over the CEO role to a trusted executive while maintaining his position as chairman of the board. It gave him more time for the foundation work and for family, and he threw himself into both with characteristic passion. He and Fiona traveled together, Emma often joining them on trips that combined business with pleasure. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen surprised Fiona with a trip back to Italy, just the two of them while Emma stayed with her grandparents. They revisited the places they had seen on their honeymoon, marveling at how much had changed and how much had stayed the same. In a small restaurant in Florence, Owen took her hand across the table in a gesture that echoed their first date. "Have I told you lately that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me?" he asked. "Probably," Fiona said, smiling, "but I never get tired of hearing it. I was so lost before you, Fiona, going through the motions of a life that looked successful but felt empty. And then you showed me what really mattered. Love, family, making a difference in whatever way we can. You gave me purpose." "You did the same for me," Fiona said. "I was hiding, throwing myself into work and volunteering to avoid risking my heart. You made me brave enough to try again, to believe in love." Owen raised his wine glass. "To 10 years and to 50 more after that." "To forever," Fiona said, clinking her glass against his. They watched the sun set over the Tuscan hills, grateful for the journey that had brought them here. It had started with a scruffy shelter dog and a generous donation, but it had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. A life built on love, on shared values, on the determination to leave the world a little better than they had found it. When they returned home, Emma launched herself into their arms with a force that nearly knocked them over, chattering about everything she had done with her grandparents. Luna's successors, a grizzled pair named Bonnie and Clyde, wagged their tails in enthusiastic greeting. The house was warm and full of life, a home in every sense of the word. That night, after Emma was asleep and the dogs were settled in their beds, Fiona and Owen sat in the backyard under the stars, Luna's cherry tree rustling gently in the breeze. Owen pulled Fiona close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I love you," she said softly. "I love you too," Owen replied. "Always." And in that moment, with the house glowing warm behind them and the stars shining overhead, Fiona felt complete. The girl who had once scrubbed kennel floors in a struggling shelter had found everything she never knew she needed. Love, purpose, family, joy. All because she had shown up one day to help animals in need, and in doing so, had opened her heart to possibilities she never expected. The shelter still stood, thriving and saving lives, a testament to what compassion and dedication could accomplish. And Fiona and Owen still volunteered there together, gray-haired and happy, showing their grandchildren the same lessons they had taught Emma. That kindness mattered. That love could be found in unexpected places. That sometimes the things you do for others end up saving you too. Their story had started with a man walking through a shelter door, looking to make a donation. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a love story for the ages, proof that when you open your heart to helping others, the universe has a way of giving you exactly what you need. Not always what you expect, but always what you need. And they lived happily ever after, surrounded by love and laughter and rescue dogs who needed homes, exactly as it was meant to be.